It's a challenge, I think, within the NHS and restricted funds to make this available for all of our patients. And we're very lucky to have Mr. James Palmer, who's a neurosurgeon from Plymouth, but he's also Clinical Director for Specialised Commissioning in the NHS in England. He's accompanied by Nikki McCulloch, who's the Senior Programme Manager for Specialised Commissioning in Cancer, and we've got Vijay Sanger, who's the Chair of our Clinical Reference Group in Urology Specialised Commissioning. So James is going to give us a presentation on the challenges faced by the commissioners, and then hopefully we'll have some time to discuss with the panel and our guests how we meet those together. So welcome to the stage.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Yes, I do a two-part week. Beginning of the week, I'm in London with NHS England. In the other half of the week, I still work as a neurosurgeon in Plymouth. I was going to start off, being a neurosurgeon, I thought I could tease you, and I was going to start off with a slide with a picture of the robots and then a picture of a toy. So I was going to go for a search for I was on the train coming up, and I was searching for toys for boys, and the safe search on Google was off, and it was all a bit too much, all in one go, to find an appropriate picture. So they haven't got that. I suspect toys for girls would have done the same thing. But my experience, I was working in my first consultant job in 1996, where we were doing the first endoscopic neurosurgery. We were integrating image guidance with neuroendoscopy. And it was so exciting because as I arrived, within 3 months of my first consultant job, they said, you're going to have an intraoperative MRI scan, the first one in the UK to do your work in terms of integrating. So this was in 1996, so nearly 20 years ago, that type of cutting-edge endoscopic integration. Now that device was also put in at St Mary's Hospital. Now, that was a problem because St Mary's didn't actually have the neurosurgical unit at St Mary's, but it was the charity at St Mary's that brought the machine. The second thing, that machine, that GE machine that we could use, it's quite narrow, so the operating bit was quite narrow, and I was a lot thinner in 1996. But luckily, my boss, my professor, was really quite fat, and he couldn't fit in the MRI scanner at all, so it was going to be all mine. But then Mary's decided that the right place to put this was in the basement. So they put this machine in the basement, and we couldn't arrange for any anaesthetised neurosurgical patients to actually travel out of that patient to the recovery area. So that machine there was installed for £10.5 million, and we didn't do a single neurosurgical case in that device. Now that's moved on. And that's the toy that in my practice, I'm desperate to have in my operating theatre, is a fully integrated OR room with image guidance, MRI facility, intraoperative MRI. But I know I can't have that anymore. I don't know what it's like in your patch. I think I'd be lucky if I had a bed and a working microbipolar scissors at the moment. So that's just never on my horizon now in terms of English surgery. So I've moved my challenges to actually how to help the NHS as a whole, and these are the stark facts, and they are really stark facts. We are in a serious position in healthcare, not just in England, but in every health service across the world. This is where we are for specialised services. We've done some work on what is going to be the rate of change in terms of cost over the next 5 or 6 years, and we're growing at about 7.9 to 8.3% per annum in specialised services. We get 2.1% growth uplift from finance. So in that 5-year time, just for specialised services, not for the whole NHS, just for specialised services, the areas that I cover, we're aiming for a 5 billion gap in terms of our ability to be able to pay for services. So we're in a seriously different scenario than what we have been facing over the last 5 to 10 years. And it's got to be understood that that's where we're at. But as being a neurosurgeon and coming into this business, I am desperate to find ways that we appropriately develop new technologies. New technologies have major benefits in certain circumstances, and if they're done for the right thing, they're the right thing to do. And we have different ways of looking at how technology innovation is brought in. Now, we know about drug development, but that's pretty stringent with their approach to how you introduce a drug. We have new surgical procedures, and we have new innovation through equipment and innovation through specific devices. Now, it's the devices and the surgical operations that are really quite tricky. In terms of that 5 billion challenge and the growth affecting just specialised services, what you're seeing here is how it's all chunked down. The first one is the drug costs for us, with the growth in drug costs. The blue area, we have really very little direct influence over, because that is the decisions made by NICE. So I'm currently dealing with the decisions to be made by NICE over hepatitis C drugs. The cost impact of that is, we think, are going to be around £700 million a year for that NICE decision. So the drugs coming our way for chemotherapy drugs, their growth is hitting us somewhere between 16 and 23% growth into drug costs at the moment. New surgical procedures is so the blue line at the end is just so rarely actually looked by NICE. So NICE isn't going to help you significantly as a specialty in determining what procedures are going to be part of your portfolio in that £5 billion deficit scenario in 5 years' time. So each technology is subject to a different approach, which I was just mentioning. So in drug development, they go through this very clear phases, with the MRHA dealing with the market approval, with NICE technology approvals, and then entry to the market. Surgical procedures, they might have an interventional procedure guidance by NICE, but then really nothing much happens after that in terms of approvals in the UK. We don't have FDA type approval for devices. And then innovation in equipment, they come through. Now the CE mark that's delivered, actually all it's telling us as a commissioner that device is safe to put in the body. The CE mark, it's not like a drug license. It doesn't tell us whether that particular device has got any benefit. A CE mark in Europe just tells us it's safe to put in someone's body, so that would be okay to do. So, and then the innovation of devices itself, again, the CE mark issue. I didn't want to stop this one too much, but in terms of NICE and the way that NICE deal with drugs, it's about 30% of our drug spend comes from drugs recommended by NICE. I think NICE are going to have their work cut out to keep up with the new wave of stratified medicines. I don't think they'll have much time to work with us in surgery. So these are the main challenges of deploying new technologies in any health system, NHS or wherever you are. There are decisions that can be just based on insufficient data. And that's happened with robotic surgery. There's no doubt that's happened with robotic surgery, that those early decisions of introducing these new robots, it has been based upon insufficient data that demonstrated benefit. And then there's an uncontrolled rollout, because as soon as there's one in the Marys, then there's got to have one at the other London hospital, and then you've got to have one here. And the rollout isn't coordinated in England at all. We as a surgical group, whether we're in the Neurosurgical Society or the Urology Society, we don't help the system coordinate what the service needs. We allow the system to burst itself and have Me Too situations. And in my patch, I think you've got robots now in Torbay, Exeter and Plymouth, I think, all within reasonably short distance from each other. Can't be sensible. And then there's no exit mechanism. So if those studies that you hear about get repeated, and there is no benefit of robotic surgery, how do we stop using them? We don't have a mechanism in the NHS to stop using something that's demonstrated it doesn't work anymore. I'm sure this is wrong. A team did this for me about a year ago on where we were with robotic surgery to try and describe the pathway of care. And we've heard about those first robots in Mary's, and you definitely went through between about 2004 and 2006, a period of time when that technology was introduced based upon really very little evidence, and those decisions were not made on much evidence. You've now got some evidence, and you've now been through a phase of really quite significant uncontrolled rollout of devices, so for the health system. Now, there is a framework that's developing for the NHS about how we should sensibly tackle introducing surgical technologies, and it's called the IDEAL framework. It makes some real sense. It's not a regulatory framework, and it's not going to be a regulatory framework. I think the only way that this framework can work is if professional organisations grasp it for their service areas, and they use some methodology in order to take a new technology and move it forward. So I would recommend that to your society along with other society, but we won't make that a regulation, that's the way we should do things. So what I do in specialised commissioning with colleagues is we write clinical policies. We say when we think we want to pay for some particular new treatment. For robotic surgery, the key is paying for the disposables that come with the kit. You only need us as NHS England because you want money from us, because this new technology is more expensive. We also write specifications, so we say if you're going to apply that policy, what should the service look like? How many of you should there be? What facilities do you need? And we have specifications for the services. But writing policies is really hard for NHS England, because it's the first time ever that for the last 2 or 3 years since the Health and Social Care Act that those policies are for the whole of England. There's no postcode lottery anymore. We commission for the whole population of England. So every single policy we write is really, really impactful. So we've been going through a process of reviewing how we do that with public consultation on how we write the policies. It was like the birth of NICE in its first 2 or 3 years had a major challenge of trying to sort out how it was going to do that. And the principles of how we make decisions are these. The general principles about transparency, how those decisions are made, the patient and public voice at the core of developing new policies, that it's evidence-based. We've got to have evidence that something works. We need to know what the measurable benefit is of something working. And in order to if we don't have a measurable benefit, we'll never know what the cost value is of doing a particular treatment. Is it fair and equitable, and is it a reasonable cost to the public? And is it affordable? Not affordable comparable to that health system, it's affordable comparable to our £5 billion deficit for specialised services. We've split the phases of doing all of that into 5 phases, with a key phase which is really important is this phase 2 and 3. So the clinical reference group that VJ is involved in is the primary job now is to seek out and boldly go where those potential developments are, to identify them, get them all written down. But what we really want to build is this phase 3, which is the clinical build phase. We need a clinical case to be built with a working group that's built up of clinicians working with patient stakeholders and in necessary companies and producing this clinical build. And then the phase 4 is how that impacts, and phase 5 is how we sign that off. And this is the NHS England policy production process. You'll hear about the thing called the clinical panel, because it's going to be tough. It's going to set a significantly high bar of the threshold by which policies go through. And this has just been introduced this year. We've just been going through 42 new policies across all our services, including one for robotic surgery. Now we're in the final stages of signing off those policies, and there will be a robotic surgery policy. I can't tell you whether it's for routine commissioning or not, but there will be by the end of June, if not the first week of July, being published. Commissioning through evaluation then is the bit that I was desperate to get introduced taking up this job, and I'm glad to say I persuaded enough people it was the right thing to do. So this is what I would want you to do as a society, of a surgical society, is that I don't think it's so hard to do in many of the things that we have to test, to do proper randomised trials of the services that we have, the devices and the things that we need to add, because even within robotic surgery, you've heard it in the talks, there's components that need testing, and to try and do that in a randomised trial way. So commissioning through evaluation is the option evaluation, and we've started. We have commissioning through evaluation projects for various devices. So there's a selective internal radiotherapy, radiation beads being injected into the liver, stereotactic ablative body radiotherapy, left atrial appendage occlusion, MitraClip, selective dorsal rhizotomy. We have a number of projects underway where there is no routine commissioning policy, but NHS England are funding the treatments while we gather national level data in order to find out whether a policy should continue after a period of time. Now, I think that's the way for surgical services, particularly in England. It's unique. There's no health system in the world that offers an evaluative commissioning model like that. So you as the whole of England can do that, and the information that you can gather, it can be very, very rapid through a process like that. In terms of robotic work programme, your clinical reference group has been working very hard. As I said, there's a clinical commissioning policy for prostate cancer on the table right now. It's been through right into the phase 5 of the process, and as I said, a final decision will be made by the board of NHS England in 2 weeks' time. And then the plan for this year is to complete policy development for both kidney and bladder cancer, and that will take you across this year, and then it will be what will be called relatively prioritised against every other potential development. And there are about 200 policy proposals currently in specialised services, so it will be relatively prioritised against those other policies as to whether that particular value that's being offered by those policies should be prioritised over others. And then I think there's a real place for you to think about where commissioning value evaluation sits in certain elements. If you are absolutely convinced that you have the evidence, and you can convince others that you have the evidence your treatment works, we'll write a policy. If you don't, use some more evaluative technique to find out the information. Thank you.